Welcome to the Aro Benaiah Show. Today we are joined by Shayne Adler, CEO of Altes Data Consulting. Shayne help our startup and growing teams turn compliance, privacy, and AI regulation into sales advantage. She simplifies complex framework into actionable strategy that reduce risk and accelerate growth. Shayne, it's really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So, Shane, what does our strategic compliance mean, and why should startup care about it?
So I'm going to start with part two.
Yeah,
Startups are having a lot of much higher expectations put on them these days, especially if they're in certain spaces. B2B companies, if they want to break into selling to an enterprise level company, they have to jump through tons of hoops in order to prove that they're trustworthy with data. And then if you're B2C, there's the risk that you won't get investment, your company will be devalued because there is this patchwork of regulation and expectation out there as far as how you conduct your business. And so we think of strategic compliance as being the sane way of addressing it, because in order for a business to get off the ground, they need things like, clients and investors. And at the same time, they don't have unlimited bandwidth, especially a startup. Some of our clients have, teams of 2 or 3 full-time employees to start when they're getting off the ground and they're pre-revenue or pre-product. And so allocating resources where it's going to make the most sense for your business, for your core business, for what your clients, investors, et cetera, care about, that's what strategic compliance is.
Wow, that was really, really amazing. The fact that I just make reference of a whole lot of startups, they have limited staff, and the fact that there's not much going on yet, knowing where to allocate their resources is very, really key. So, how can early stage founders approach compliance without overcomplicating things?
So, like you said, when a company is new, there's not a lot there. You probably have your vendor stack and you're building your product. And so that's the ideal time to address it, because going back and having to do it afterwards, we call that compliance debt. It's like tech debt, where you have to go back and fix all your tech to line up with what you actually needed. There are things that you can do right up front, like mapping your vendors and choosing your vendors in a way that makes sense. Like everything from your CRM, your database, your mailing lists, how you're running your website, all of those things that you are going to do at the ground floor, those feed into your practices down the line. So in mapping like where you're going to be putting your data, like which vendors, like I said, setting routines for looking at how long you're going to keep things. If it's not your data, if it's somebody's email address and they said, I don't want to be on your mailing list anymore, like making sure that's a part of your cadence. All of those things right from out the gate are easy when it's a limited scope. And then down the line, their consequences of not doing those things just balloon. One situation that we unfortunately saw was on the buying side of an M&A deal, where a company hadn't done those things on the ground floor, and they weren't bad people, they just didn't know what they didn't know. And they were collecting data from all sorts of places, but they didn't realize they didn't have the right to hold on to it for certain things. And they were subject to something in the US that's becoming much more popular called algorithmic disgorgement, which is a mouthful. But what it boils down to is, there's tons of companies that are going to say, sure, I'll take $1 million fine because this is going to make me $10 million.
Yeah.
But so they're not going to actually do the things they're supposed to do. That's just business calculation, right? So now what they're doing is they're making companies go back and delete everything that was based on the data that wasn't handled correctly. So this company that these founders, these nice guys, thought they were going to get a 8-figure payout. And unfortunately, everything was devalued. As a result, they had no product anymore. And so they lost 96% of their valuation just like that. And you can't go back and try to find another buyer after that. You have to disclose it. You have to tell a future buyer that that's happened or that's been discovered, or it's fraud.
Wow, this is
it's
really
scary,
a lot.
right?
So, what are some practical steps our team can take to align engineering, legal, and sales around compliance?
I think that number one, management has to be on board with the whole thing. It has to come from the culture at the top, and you have to have these policies and procedures and standard operating procedures baked into the culture of a company where it becomes second nature to, check with the compliance officer or whoever is in charge of that, management, legal, whoever it may be, before you decide to use a new vendor or sign into a new tool to try it out. You want to have guardrails in place, and you also want to be realistic. I've spoken to companies and I'll say, like, how are you using AI? And they'll say, well, we aren't. I guarantee you someone in your team is using AI, even if it's just to draft an email. You need to, but what you don't want is those employees to be putting anything they shouldn't be into the AI. You want to actually look at what is happening in reality and try to meet that with like practical tools that are going to meet the needs so that people don't have to find workarounds. You just want to know what you're holding on to. Another thing I hear is we don't collect personal data. And I ask in response, do you have people's email addresses? And you see it like dawn on somebody like that's actually personal information.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, looking at what they have. Yeah.
So that simply means that to reduce the risk of getting these and the risk of the compliance and a whole lot of stuff, management has to be on board alongside so that they could actually get to kind of review every decision that is going to be made and a whole lot of different steps that is going to be made. So that boils down to how do you balance meeting regulatory and requirements with moving fast as a startup?
I usually will honestly ignore the regulations themselves because they are changing so rapidly. I have a weekly email I send out with everything that is going on that week, and it's geographically limited, but it still has enough. So what we do is we actually align to frameworks and certifications because those change far less, but are based on the exact same principles that underpin the regulations. And so that's a really stable reference point. Yeah. The secret that no one wants to admit is that no company is fully compliant or could be and still function as a business. And so getting those frameworks and certifications, you get there enough to have a defensible narrative and to ensure that if questions come, it's not anything catastrophic. You're just looking at that well plan in a discrete area as opposed to the sky is falling.
Yeah, so true. I think there's a whole lot need to be put in place, the certification and putting up right. Yeah, amazing. So how can small team implement our lightweight but defensive control effectively?
It often will be things like I was referring to, like mapping where you have data, looking at what you're holding on to, who's in charge of it, and think about like why it's there. Because ensuring that data is handled for the purpose it was collected is one of those critical ones. You don't want to build an AI model off of something you collected for marketing, right? So starting from there and then taking that inventory and working, from that list, it could just even be like a Google Doc or a spreadsheet that you start with, and just trying to be a good human about it. It's a good starting point.
How does demonstrating compliance build trust with enterprising customer?
There are the certifications I alluded to earlier. Things like there is a GDPR certification out there. ISO, IEC has international standards, and getting those certifications for enterprise clients tends to be like table stakes. It tends to be a basic requirement if you're a B2B company. So a lot of times those will be something that a potential customer or client will require as shorthand for, you're doing the right thing. You're being that good human with the data. I typically will hear from founders that, we're too small or we're too early to think about it. I think just a lot of like sticking their head in the sand kind of things. Like they can't afford it is another one, but there's an ROI, there's a return on investment that you need to think about as far as what resources you want to dedicate to it. And those resources may be employee time. It doesn't have to be spending $10,000 to get a certification badge on your website. It may just be, you have to divert some resources from like project building. It could be hiring someone like us to come in and do it for you. But it's the idea that they can't afford it now. It's just kicking the can down the road. It's kicking the problem down the road.
Yeah, wow, amazing. So actually, can you share more like an example where compliance directly helped close a particular deal?
Yeah, I think exactly what happened, what I described with B2B. There's a new company, a new tech company, SaaS, and compared to a lot of the other companies in the running, they were small, but they were able to lock down a deal because they had already aligned to principles, which in the US tends to be the gold standard. And in their first year, they were able to start generating 7 figures in revenue as a result.
Wow, amazing. So what advice will you give to founders or those who are listening now, just starting out and thinking about strategic compliance? Where should they be, where they should get started from, or before you even think about getting started?
I think just looking at what they're holding on to and getting rid of the preconceptions about them being too small or being too early. Those things that I hear all the time, because it is one of those things that is extremely expensive and difficult to go back and fix after the fact. And so trying to get to a point where you at least have a sense of what's happening. You have policies in place. Your team understands what they're supposed to be doing. If there's, hopefully not, but every company eventually has a security incident, that people know what their roles are supposed to be. All of those like things that go into the bucket of operations that seem like they should be for a big tech company, they still need to be in place at the ground floor. And keeping that in mind as you build things up, it's not just HR and financial, it requires somebody to be thinking about these things these days.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much. And it has really been an enlightening moment, especially being that compliance could actually make or break a particular company, no matter how big they become. And this is really a whole lot. Thank you so very much.
Yes.
For my audience who want to reach out, who want to learn more about compliance and who actually want to seek your coaching in respect of that too, how can they reach out to you, and where is the best platform to do this?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can just look me up by my name. There's not a lot of people out there with my first name at the very least. So feel free to reach out there. I'm also reachable through our website, aetos-data.com. So aetos-data.com.
Yeah, definitely. It's really amazing having you on the show, and thank you for the lot of insight you just give, which just speak volumes. Thanks for sharing actionable insights. Listener can check out our rate of return investments in the show notes. And thank you for compliance and for business. Thank you once again for being on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye.